Hart, Williams stepped out of the transport van and into a world of frost and wonder. The Icehotel loomed before him, ethereal and otherworldly, its crystalline walls glowing faintly under the Arctic twilight. The towering structure, carved entirely from ice, reflected the dim sunlight in a kaleidoscope of blues and whites, a frozen masterpiece of artistry and engineering. Hart had seen pictures online, read the travel blogs and watched the videos, but none of it compared to the surreal reality of standing here in person. "It's smaller than I expected," someone murmured behind him, their voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around their face. Hart disagreed. The Icehotel seemed enormous to him, less like a building and more like a cathedral raised in worship of the cold itself. The sheer grandeur of it made his breath catch, though that might also have been the biting chill of the Arctic air. He pulled his parka tighter around himself and took a deep breath, the frosty vapor curling in front of his face. "Welcome to the Icehotel," a cheerful voice broke through the silence. A tall man with curly hair and an easy grin waved from the entrance. "I'm Larry, your ice concierge for the week. Trust me, you're going to love it here." The group of guests shuffled toward the doors, their boots crunching over the snow-covered pathway. As Hart approached the entrance, he felt a pang of unease that he couldn't quite place. The hotel's icy facade seemed to shift under the pale light, as though the carved walls were breathing, subtly expanding and contracting. He blinked and the feeling was gone. Inside, the Icehotel was a revelation. The lobby stretched high above them, its vaulted ceiling shimmering with light from an enormous chandelier made entirely of ice. The floors were polished to a mirror-like finish, reflecting the intricate sculptures that lined the walls. Towering over the entrance was a massive elephant head carved from a single block of ice, its trunk curling gracefully toward the floor. The tusks gleamed, smooth and sharp, while the eyes, dark, glinting gemstones, seemed to follow him as he passed. "This," Larry said, spreading his arms theatrically, "is the heart of the Icehotel. Every year we rebuild it from scratch. Artists from around the globe come here to design and carve these sculptures. Every detail you see is unique to this season." Hart moved deeper into the lobby, marveling at the artistry. Along one wall, a row of frozen trees stretched their branches, each leaf etched with such precision it looked ready to fall. Near the entrance to a hallway stood a life-sized wolf, poised mid-stride, its eyes fierce and glinting with predatory intent. The sculptures were beautiful, but there was something about them, something too alive, that made Hart uneasy. "Wow," a woman beside him murmured. "It's like walking into another world." Hart turned to see her smiling at him. She was mid-30s, with dark hair tucked under a knit hat and a friendly warmth in her eyes. "First time here?" she asked. "Yeah," Hart replied, still taking in the surreal surroundings. "It's a lot to take in." His mind flashed to his father's funeral 5 weeks prior. The smell of sorrow filled the sachets lining each church pew, emphasized by the sea of black clothing and tears. The man we had all gathered for, once a booming captain of industry, now lay withered in the middle of rows of flowers. That same smell had followed him into the probate attorney's office, where he was presented a letter from his father, to be given to him in the event of his passing. "My dear Hartford, you have brought so much joy to your mother and I, and we couldn't be prouder. I've tried to teach you many things, but sadly one lesson was missed. I divided my entire estate between you and your sister on the request that you live your life better than I did mine. Fall in love, go places, see the world while you can. Because whether you realize it or not, you've been building your bucket list for most of your life. Use this money to clear that list. As I've proven today, you only live." The woman chuckled, her laughter dissipating his thoughts. "No kidding. I'm Patrice, by the way." "Hart," he said, shaking her gloved hand. "Hart Williams." They exchanged pleasantries as Larry called out names and handed out room keys. Patrice explained that she was visiting to cross the Icehotel as a way of using her newly divorced husband's money to achieve a dream they had together. "I figured, why not? Life's short, I don't need him to enjoy this." She shrugged. There was a hint of something unspoken in her voice, a sadness she tried to mask with a bright smile. Soon, Larry led them down a winding hallway lined with ice carvings, explaining the hotel's layout and amenities as they walked. When they reached Hart's suite, he stopped in his tracks, stunned. The room was an Arctic dreamscape. Frosted trees grew from the walls, their branches arching overhead to form a frozen canopy. The bed, carved from a single block of ice, was covered in thick reindeer hides and heavy blankets, the only splash of warmth in the otherwise glacial room. Larry handed him the key with a grin. "Don't worry, it's warmer than it looks. Those hides will keep you cozy. Just don't lick the walls, okay?" Hart laughed despite himself, watching as Larry moved on to the next room. He set down his bag and ran a hand over the hides. The contrast between the cold, hard ice and the softness of the blankets was oddly satisfying. Exhausted from the journey, he slipped under the covers that night and was surprised by how quickly he warmed up. His sleep was deep, though not entirely peaceful. He dreamed of frozen forests stretching endlessly into a dark horizon. Shadowy figures moved among the trees, their eyes glinting like stars as they watched him. He felt no fear, only a strange, quiet acceptance, as if the icy world was drawing him in. By morning, he awoke feeling oddly refreshed, though the memory of those eyes lingered in his mind like fragments of a forgotten thought. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The next day dawned pale and cold. Hart spent the morning exploring the Icehotel's many wonders. Each suite was a work of art, with themes ranging from fairy tales to abstract designs. One room was styled as a frozen ocean, its walls carved with waves and schools of fish that seemed to shimmer in the light. Another was a winter palace, complete with a throne sculpted from ice. The corridors twisted and turned, making the hotel feel much larger than it had seemed from the outside. Hart marveled at the artistry but found himself disoriented at times, the hallways blending together in a maze of frosted walls. He joined the other guests in the lounge for lunch, where they gathered around a bar carved entirely from ice. Crystal-clear glasses clinked against the smooth surface as Larry served cocktails and joked with the group. "Can you believe this place?" Patrice asked, sliding onto the stool beside him. She looked more relaxed than she had the day before, her cheeks pink from the cold. "It's like being in a dream." Hart nodded, sipping his drink. "Yeah, though I can't shake the feeling that it's watching us." Patrice raised an eyebrow, laughing softly. "The hotel? Maybe?" Hart grinned sheepishly. "I mean, look at these sculptures. They're too perfect. It's like they're alive." Patrice glanced at the wolf statue in the corner, its icy gaze fixed and unblinking. "I see what you mean," she said, lowering her voice. "It's a little unsettling." Larry joined them, his usual bright demeanor in full force. "Don't let the sculptures scare you," he said, overhearing their conversation. "This place is magic, sure, but it's a good kind of magic. People come here to escape, to find something special. And it always delivers." His words lingered in Hart's mind long after lunch. That night, as he lay in bed beneath the glowing ice canopy, he thought about what Larry had said. The hotel did feel magical, but not in the way Larry described. It felt alive, like it was watching, waiting. His dreams were more vivid this time. He walked through an endless maze of icy corridors, the walls shifting around him as he moved. The shadowy figures from before were closer now, their eyes gleaming like cold fire. They whispered, their voices soft and urgent, but he couldn't understand the words. Hart awoke to a pale gray light filtering through the frosted window of his suite. The faint glow made the icy canopy above his bed glisten as if the frozen branches were alive. He lay there for a moment, cocooned in warmth, listening to the faint whistle of the wind outside. But as he stirred, the wind grew louder, angrier. By the time he reached the window, it howled with a force that rattled the panes. Outside, the world was white, the horizon swallowed in a torrent of swirling snow. The storm had arrived, erasing the edges of the landscape and wrapping the Icehotel in a cocoon of isolation. It was as though the storm had sealed them off from the world, leaving only the hotel and whatever lay inside it. By mid-afternoon, the guests had gathered in the ballroom, their laughter and conversation echoing off the smooth ice walls. Hart found himself lingering near the bar, nursing a vodka chilled to perfection in a glass carved from frozen water. The chandeliers overhead sparkled, refracting light that danced across the walls in shimmering patterns. "This storm's no joke," said a guest nearby, a burly man in a heavy sweater. "They're saying it could last all night." "It's a good thing we're in here and not out there," Patrice said, her voice light but her gaze distracted. She sat beside Hart, stirring her drink absently. "It's like the hotel was built for this, isn't it? A sanctuary." Hart glanced at her, catching the unease in her tone. Before he could respond, the ballroom doors swung open, and a woman stumbled inside, her face pale as the snow outside. She clutched the frame of the doorway. "The view," she said, her voice trembling. "It's changed?" The room fell silent. "What do you mean?" Larry asked, stepping forward, his ever-present grin faltering. "I don't know how to explain it," the woman stammered. "It's not the same. It's wrong." Curiosity prickled through the group. Larry offered her a calming smile, though it looked strained. "I'm sure it's just the storm playing tricks," he said. "But let's have a look." Hart followed Larry and a handful of guests as they made their way toward the woman's suite. The corridor was dim, the light from the chandeliers overhead flickering slightly. By the time they reached her room, Hart felt a cold weight settle in his chest, heavier than the icy air. The woman gestured to the window with a trembling hand. "It was flat yesterday. Just snow. Now look." Hart peered out, his breath fogging the frosted glass. The storm had cleared just enough to reveal a jagged cliff edge mere feet from the building. Below, an abyss yawned, black and infinite, as if the earth itself had been swallowed whole. "Jesus," someone muttered behind him. "That wasn't there before," the woman said, her voice rising. "It wasn't." The air in the room felt tight, as though the walls were pressing inward. Hart stepped back, his pulse pounding. Larry hesitated, then forced a cheerful laugh. "It's just the wind shifting the snowdrifts," he said. "Optical illusions and all that." But Hart didn't buy it. He could feel the truth creeping in, cold and undeniable. The hotel was moving. One of the braver guests, a wiry man in his 40s, muttered something about checking it out. Before anyone could stop him, he threw on his coat and slipped out through the back exit. Hart caught a glimpse of him as he neared the cliff, his boots crunching on the ice. "Be careful," Larry called, his voice taut with strain. The man crouched near the edge, peering into the darkness below. He turned back toward the group, waving as if to say it was fine. And then the ice beneath him cracked. The sound was deafening, echoing through the frozen air. The man's arms flailed, his mouth opening in a silent scream. For a moment he hung there, teetering on the edge. And then he was gone, swallowed by the void. Someone screamed. Hart couldn't move, his feet rooted to the floor as the ice at the edge of the cliff glistened red where the man had fallen. The storm roared as if in approval. Larry clapped his hands, his voice forced and bright. "Everyone inside. Come on now, no need to stand out here." Hart didn't need to be told twice. As he followed the group back into the safety of the hotel, he couldn't help but feel the building itself was watching, its walls tightening around them like a frozen predator closing in on its prey. The next morning, the storm showed no sign of letting up. Hart woke to an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint thrum of wind outside. The light filtering through his window was dim and gray, giving the room an eerie glow. He dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway, which felt colder than before. The air was sharp, biting, and the walls seemed to shimmer with a faint pulse, as though the ice itself was alive. He walked cautiously, his footsteps echoing, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the quiet. The day passed in a blur of tension. The guests gathered in clusters, whispering among themselves. Larry, ever the optimist, did his best to maintain morale, organizing games in the lounge and handing out drinks with his usual charm. But Hart could see the strain in his face. The man who had fallen was never mentioned. Patrice sat quietly in the corner, staring at the chandelier overhead. When Hart approached, she gave him a faint smile, but it was fragile, as though it might shatter at the slightest touch. "I don't like this," she admitted, her voice low. "The storm, the cliff, this place." "It's just a storm," Hart said, though he didn't believe it himself. "We'll be fine." Patrice glanced at him, her eyes dark. It feels like the walls are closing in, like the hotel is alive. Her words sent a shiver down his spine, but before he could respond, a loud crack echoed through the room. The guests froze as the chandelier overhead trembled, tiny shards of ice falling like glass rain. And then it happened. The stalactite. A massive shard of ice broke free from the ceiling, plunging down with a deafening crash. It struck Larry where he stood, piercing his chest and pinning him to the floor. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock, his eyes wide and unseeing as blood seeped across the icy surface. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then the screams began. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. That night, Hart lay awake in his room, the reindeer hides pulled tightly around him. The hotel felt different now, its quiet no longer comforting. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat, and he thought he could hear whispers in the darkness. When sleep finally came, it was restless. He dreamed of endless hallways that twisted and turned, their walls slick with ice that pulsed under his touch. Shadowy figures lurked at the edges of his vision, watching him, their eyes glowing faintly. He woke drenched in sweat, the whispers still echoing in his ears. When he stepped into the hallway, his heart stopped. The corridor was littered with bodies. Naked, pale, and lifeless, they lay sprawled across the ice in grotesque positions, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Their limbs were twisted unnaturally, as though they had been broken and reassembled. The smell of blood hung in the air, sharp and metallic, and the walls seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Hart's stomach churned as his eyes fell on Patrice. She lay among the dead, her arms outstretched as if reaching for help that had never come. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. His knees buckled and he fell to the floor while rising in his throat. For a long moment he couldn't move, couldn't think. The walls seemed to lean in around him, and the faint thrum of the pulse grew louder, echoing in his ears. The hotel was alive, and it was feeding. Hart remained frozen in the hallway, his breath fogging the frigid air as his mind struggled to process the scene before him. The bodies, the blood, the way their pale, contorted forms seemed to merge with the icy floor as if the hotel itself had claimed them. His eyes locked onto Patrice's lifeless face, her expression frozen in an unbearable mix of terror and pleading. She had reached for help, for him, and he hadn't been there. The faint sound of the wind outside mingled with the unsettling stillness of the corridor. The flickering light from the ice sconces cast distorted shadows on the walls, making the scene feel like a macabre painting come to life. Hart's stomach churned, and he forced himself to turn away, steadying himself against the cold wall. The ice beneath his hand vibrated faintly, not from the storm outside, but from something deeper, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to pulse through the structure. A heartbeat. Hart jerked his hand back. He staggered down the corridor, his boots slipping on the smooth ice as he put as much distance as he could between himself and the gruesome tableau. The pulse in the walls seemed to follow him, a steady rhythm that grew louder the farther he went. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at his exposed skin. He rounded a corner and leaned heavily against the wall. The hallway stretched endlessly before him. Or had it always been this long? He wasn't sure anymore. The layout of the hotel, once charmingly labyrinthine, now felt malicious, shifting around him like a living maze. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his temples, trying to steady his thoughts. "It's not real," he whispered, his voice sounding weak and small in the icy silence. "It's just not real." But deep down he knew it was. The rest of the hotel seemed abandoned. Hart stumbled through the corridors, calling out, his voice echoing off the ice walls. No one answered. The guests and staff had either vanished or joined the bodies in the hallway outside his room. He passed through the lounge, the dining hall, even the ballroom, each space eerily untouched, as though the horror outside hadn't reached them. In the ballroom, the chandeliers above flickered faintly. Hart paused beneath one, staring up at its frozen splendor. He thought about Larry, his cheerful optimism extinguished in an instant by the falling stalactite. The image of Larry's lifeless body, blood pooling around him, flashed through Hart's mind, and he shuddered. The whispers began then. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the soft hum of the ice, but growing louder with each step he took. Words he couldn't understand, layered over each other in a cacophony of hushed tones. He spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Only the shimmering walls and the faint pulse that had become impossible to ignore. And then he saw it. At the far end of the ballroom, a door he hadn't noticed before. It was seamless, almost indistinguishable from the wall around it, but it pulsed faintly with a soft blue light. The whispers grew louder as he approached, and he hesitated, his hand hovering over the icy surface. A part of him screamed to turn back, to run as far and as fast as he could, but there was nowhere else to go, nowhere to hide. The hotel wouldn't let him. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls glowing with an eerie, translucent light. Hart stepped inside, the temperature dropping instantly, the air sharp and heavy. The ice beneath his feet was smooth, almost glass-like, and as he looked down, he saw something moving beneath the surface. Veins. Dark, pulsating veins stretched across the floor, branching out and weaving through the walls like a circulatory system. They pulsed in time with the rhythmic drum he'd been hearing, each beat sending a ripple of energy through the room. The glow intensified, illuminating the chamber with a sickly blue light, and Hart felt a wave of nausea roll over him. This wasn't a hotel. It had never been a hotel. It was alive. The whispers crescendoed, filling the chamber, and Hart clutched his head, stumbling forward. His vision blurred, the light around him bending and twisting. The walls seemed to move, the veins contracting and expanding like lungs inhaling and exhaling. And then, from the far corner of the chamber, something stirred. A figure emerged from the shadows, its skeletal frame coated in frost and ice. Its limbs were twisted, impossibly long and jagged, its hollow eyes glowing faintly with a cold, malevolent light. It moved toward him slowly, its steps uneven, its body creaking with every motion. Hart stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest as the creature raised a claw-like hand, its fingers curling and uncurling with eerie precision. "Stay back," Hart shouted, his voice cracking. He reached for something, anything, but his hands found only the smooth, unyielding ice. The creature paused, tilting its head as if studying him. Its hollow eyes burned into his, and Hart felt his knees weaken. The whispers grew deafening, and for a moment he thought he could understand them. They weren't just voices. They were the hotel, speaking through the ice, through the walls, through the veins that pulsed beneath him. They were calling for him. The chamber pulsed again, and Hart's vision wavered. He dropped to his knees, clutching at his chest as the cold seeped into him, deeper than skin, deeper than bone. He could feel the hotel's hunger, its ancient, cosmic need. The creature took another step forward, its clawed hand outstretched. And Hart understood. This was no sanctuary. This was a trap. The Icehotel was alive, an ancient being that fed on blood and souls, drawing its victims into its frozen embrace and consuming them one by one. He was next. The chamber throbbed, a rhythmic pulse so loud now that it seemed to reverberate through Hart's very bones. The veins beneath the ice glowed a deep, sickly blue, radiating an energy that was both hypnotic and terrifying. The skeletal creature moved closer, its frost-covered body emitting a faint crackling sound with every step. Hart scrambled back on his hands and knees. His mind raced, every nerve screaming for him to flee, but his body refused to obey. The whispers, louder now, filled his ears with overlapping, unintelligible words. They weren't just sounds, they were pulling him in, compelling him forward, toward the creature and the pulsing veins that seemed to be waiting for him. "No," he choked out, shaking his head. "This can't be real." But it was. The whispers reached a fever pitch as the creature knelt in front of him, its hollow eyes fixed on his. It raised a clawed hand, brushing it lightly against his face. The ice burned like fire, and Hart cried out, falling back. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, as it leaned closer. Its mouth opened in a soundless scream, its breath a freezing gale that tore at his skin. The hotel was alive, and it was hungry. Hart staggered to his feet, his legs trembling. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" The whispers softened, merging into a single voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Deep, resonant, and ancient, it filled the chamber with a chilling authority. "Sacrifice," it intoned. The word echoed, twisting through the icy walls. "Blood, souls, you." The veins beneath his feet pulsed brighter, and Hart felt the heat drain from his body. His knees buckled, and he collapsed, his hands pressing against the ice as though trying to ground himself. But the ice beneath him wasn't solid anymore. It was alive, shifting and rippling under his touch like flesh. "This can't be happening," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's a building. Just a building?" The entity's voice responded, cold and unrelenting. "This form is what you see, what I choose for you to see. I am older than this ice, older than the stars above. You are my sustenance, my offering." The chamber seemed to shrink around him, the walls leaning in as the pulsing veins grew brighter. He could feel the hotel feeding off his fear, drawing strength from his desperation. Wanted more. Wanted everything. Hart's mind raced, fragments of the past few days flashing before him. The other guests, Patrice, Larry, the bodies in the hallway. They had all been part of this, chosen by the hotel to feed its endless hunger. He saw Patrice's face again, her eyes wide and terrified, and guilt twisted in his stomach. He hadn't saved her. He hadn't saved anyone. "I won't let you take me," Hart said, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as he spoke, he knew it was futile. The hotel had chosen him. It had been waiting for this moment, biding its time, and there was no escaping its grasp. The creature reached for him again, its skeletal fingers closing around his wrist with a grip like frozen iron. It pulled him toward the center of the chamber, where the veins converged into a massive, glowing heart embedded in the ice. The pulse was deafening now, each beat vibrating through the air like a drum. The heart began to glow brighter, its light enveloping him. "Your fear strengthens me," the voice said, resonating through the chamber. "Your blood completes me." Hart's mind reeled as he fought against the creature's grip, but it was impossibly strong. He was dragged to the heart, the icy veins wrapping around his ankles and wrists. The cold seeped into his skin, spreading through his body like poison, and he cried out as his strength faded. The ice beneath him softened, giving way as the veins tightened their hold. He could feel his life draining away, siphoned into the glowing heart. The whispers returned, softer now, almost soothing, as if the hotel were thanking him for his sacrifice. Hart's vision blurred, the edges of the chamber fading into darkness. The whispers slowed, their urgency fading, and he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. His thoughts drifted to Patrice, to Larry, to the others who had come before him. He wondered if they had felt this same peace before the end. The pulsing heart grew brighter, its rhythm steady and strong, as Hart's body sank deeper into the ice. The hotel fed, its hunger sated, for now. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. As the Arctic sun rose, the Icehotel began to dissolve. The walls cracked and melted, the sculptures collapsing into pools of crystal clear water. The bodies, the whispers, the creature, all of it disappeared, leaving only an empty stretch of snow and ice where the hotel had once stood. The storm faded, and the landscape returned to its quiet stillness. But deep beneath the frozen earth, the ancient entity lingered, dormant but not gone. It waited patiently, biding its time until the next traveler stumbled into its frozen domain, drawn by promises of beauty and wonder. The Icehotel would rise again, and it would feed.